Our topic for today is going to be memos. It's important first to understand why we write memos. Memos can have different purposes within an organization. One can be to bring attention to problems, the other is to solve problems. Memos should be informative. They should inform the reader of new information or of policy or procedural changes within the organization. An effective memo connects the purpose of the writer with the interests and needs of the reader. As we discussed in the visual rhetoric lesson, it is also important to consider our audience when composing a memo. Ensure that all of the people that the memo is addressed to have read the memo. Only send memos to necessary readers. Sensitive information should be delivered face-to-face or by phone, not through a memo. And memos are most effective when sent to a small to moderate number of people to communicate company or job objectives. We will now take a look visually at how a memo is constructed. There are different parts to the memo, and you're going to see this again later in your assignment. But it begins with a title that indicates the type of document being sent, a heading, the information about the author, recipient, subject, and date. Handwritten initials are the initials of whoever composed the memo. The body, which contains the purpose and the explanation of the memo. Reference initials, if there's another author or contributor. And then attachments and enclosures indicate that there's other documents that may be attached or enclosed with the memo. The first part of the document is the title. This indicates what kind of document is being sent. In this case, it's a memorandum, also known as a memo. The title should be centered, and titles should be in all capital letters. The next part of the document is the heading. This segment follows this general format. To, the reader's name and subject titles. From, your name and job title. Date, with the complete and current date. The subject, what the memo is about, and it should be highlighted in some way. It should address the reader by his or her correct name and job title, and it should be specific and concise, and that should be in the subject line. The next and most prominent part of the memo is the body. It's composed of the following parts: an opening statement, context, the task segment, discussion segments, closing segment, and summary segment. We will go into details on the next slide about each of these segments. The first part of the body is the opening segment. This provides the purpose of the memo, the context and problem, and the specific assignment or task involved. You should give the reader a brief overview of what the memo is about. The more direct the memo plan, the more explicit the introduction should be. This should help clarify the reason why the audience is reading the document. This introduction should also be brief. The approximate length should be a short paragraph. The opening segment should contain the context. This is the event, circumstance, or background of the problem that you're trying to solve with the memo. Use a paragraph or a few sentences to establish the background and state the problem. It might be sufficient to use the opening of a sentence to completely explain the context. It's also important to only include what the reader needs and to be sure that it's clear. The other part of the opening segment is the task segment. This describes what you're doing to help solve the problem. Include only information that is needed by the decision makers. Be convincing that a real problem exists, and don't ramble on with boring details. Make sure also that tasks are clearly described. The next part of the body is the discussion segment. This includes all of the details that support your ideas. It's important to begin with information that is the most important, which could be key findings and recommendations. Start with the general information first and then become more specific throughout the document. The discussion segment should include supporting ideas, facts, and research that will support your argument and persuade the reader. The final section of the body is the closing segment. Close with a courteous ending that states what action you want the reader to take, and make sure you consider how the reader will benefit from the desired actions and how you can make those actions easier for the reader. If your document is longer than one page, you may choose to include a separate summary segment. This is not necessary for short memos. If you do have a longer memo, make sure that it doesn't take up a significant amount of space and that the segment provides a brief description of key recommendations that you've reached. This segment may also include references to methods and sources that you've used in your research. The next part of the document is handwritten and reference initials. Signed initials of the writer are included to indicate that he or she has approved the memo, and initials replace the need for a signature. Reference initials are included if there's more than one author to the document. Make sure you document your findings and provide detailed information wherever necessary. This might involve attaching lists, graphs, tables at the end of your memo. Be sure to refer to your attachments in your memo by adding a notation that they're attached below your closing. The next thing we need to talk about is formatting. Memos are usually concise and easy to read. They should be no longer than 2 pages, but generally are only 1 page long. Memos should be single-spaced and left justified. Instead of using indentations to show a new paragraph, you'll skip a line between the 2 paragraphs. You can also help the reader to understand your memo better by using headings. Headings can be used for the summary and discussion segments. Write headings that are short, but also clear and concise. And put information points or details into lists rather than paragraphs when possible. The segments of the memo should be allocated in the following way. The header should be 1/8 of the memo. The opening should be 1/4 of the memo. The summary and discussion segment should be 1/2 of the memo. And the closing segment should be 1/8 of the memo. The next portion of this presentation will be on the word processing skills necessary to create a memo. We'll start with changing the page layout, formatting text, changing line and paragraph spacing, and creating lists.